Hi and welcome. Bill Finnegan is one of the most respected figures in the Australian Italian motorcycle scene and pioneered many performance parts for Moto Guzzis in the 1970s. I was lucky enough to catch up with him one afternoon, and this is his story. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you.
So how did you actually get involved in motorcycling to begin with?
That's like every story, a very long story. I guess
We'll try and keep it briefish.
very brief. We'll keep it as brief as we can. I grew up on a farm in Australia, so obviously all farm kids had motorcycles. Ours were all English motorcycles, so that was where it all started from.
So what was your first then?
A Coventry Eagle.
A Coventry Eagle, that's a two-stroke, isn't it?
It is. That didn't go, so...
Is that a Villiers engine?
It is.
Oh, geez,
Villiers twin-port two-stroke.
I know something about British bikes, not much, mind you.
And then we moved on to a matchless single, and then a Panther 350.
Not much of a step up.
Unfortunately not.
So we'll skip forward a little bit into the modern age.
Modern age. So obviously, moving on from that, we completed apprenticeship, being obviously interested in mechanical stuff. So I trained as a diesel mechanic originally, but then realised living in the country, if you want to get on, you had to move on. So I moved to the biggest cities, Melbourne in Australia, and worked for Mercedes for a while, and then switched over onto motorcycles. So in around the early 70s, a friend of mine that I knew from my apprenticeship days was buying a Moto Guzzi, and I'd never heard of them much in those days, and scoffed at him saying, what do you want those things for? But after bringing 750 back from Italy, I became fairly impressed by them, and that's where my Moto Guzzi sort of getting hooked on a brand started, so mid-70s.
So when did you start working as a mechanic on motorcycles?
Back in probably 8 years before that, so late 60s, early 70s. So that was the start of doing motorcycles, physical work. And in those days you could easily switch trades from cars. There was no such thing as really light engine courses or anything like that. If you showed aptitude and you could do it and you had any interest, it was easy to do. So easy to switch over. Bike shops wanted to quite happily employ you because they seemed to think that you, being perhaps a automotive, like a diesel mechanic or a car mechanic, that you probably could work on motorcycles easily. And also I had an interest in it, so it was easy.
I don't think there were specialised motorcycle courses anyway.
No,
as an apprenticeship it was automotive and that was it.
Just automotive. There was occasionally, I believe, you could do a thing called a light engine course, which was probably, I think, 8 weeks course or something. You just added it onto your normal apprenticeship as a mechanic, so that was fine. And obviously when I did an apprenticeship in the country, we worked on everything. It was trucks, tractors, lawnmowers, so whatever came in the door, you worked on. So it was a good spread of knowledge.
So when did you start working professionally on Italian bikes?
From about the mid-70s onwards, that was where we really got hooked on them. And then I went 74, 75, I went to England and bought a Ducati from the factory, lived in...
Wow, I never knew you had a Ducati. This is hidden.
860 GTS. Nice blue and silver one. So I rode that around Europe for a while, and then lived in England for a while and worked for an Italian motorcycle repair place in London for a while. Also was involved with Cosworth, a company in England that was affiliated with Cosworth. So I used to do engine building with these Cosworth engines. So I had the ability to switch backwards and forwards. After being in England about 18 months, I think it was, returned to Australia and then went straight back into motorcycles. Worked for Ron Angel for a while here in Melbourne. So
that'd be at his Richmond store while it was still there?
It was still in Richmond, so it was on Ducatis, BMWs, that were the main things he sold. And I'm trying to think what else he sold. What was the other Italian brand? Can't think of it at the moment.
Bimoto? He had Bimoto for a while.
He had Bimoto, but the other Italian V-twin... Marini, thank you. The little grey cells are not as sharp as they used to be, unfortunately. From there I moved into Peter Stevens for a while. Then back into the automotive industry. I was working for GM Research and Development. Having worked in England and been involved with Cosworth stuff, I became much more interested from an engineering point of view than a mechanic.
So you started focusing, even at that age, more on the engineering of I guess, small engines.
Yeah, any engine
particular.
really, but obviously motorcycles to me were always a bit more exciting than car engines. Not that you can't say that car engines for, say, open wheeler racing, because that's the sort of stuff I was involved with. But also in Australia, while I was working, prior to even going to England, I actually used to work for a race team here in Australia part-time, which was Warren Cullen, which used to run the Pioneer racing team, which was A9X and L34 Tirana. So we used to have to do everything on those cars. I was a designated driver of the car to get it to the tracks because I had a diesel truck licence, so I used to have to drive the transporters to Bathurst and back again, so we did that for a couple of years as well. So again, you're involved with not only racing, but from an engineering point of view, dealing with some of the guys, and I dealt with, in those days, a lot of Repco people, because...
Well, Repco were big in, particularly in competition in those days, weren't they?
Yeah, I don't know how many people really nowadays understand how big Repco were, but they certainly were. They took on the world's best in Formula One engine design, and with the help of people like Phil Irving and a number of other people in Australia.
Oh, Jack Brabham, of course.
Yes, and Jack was the designated team to run the engines, so those engines were built in Australia. At Repco here in Melbourne, in Richmond, they were designed, developed and built in Australia and then shipped over for him to race. So Repco had a very good background in racing around, so some of those guys that worked in that used to work on the once, because Repco had already finished racing in the Formula One in that area, but were doing some work. So I had a connection with some of the people, so I continued that connection on within the motorcycle industry then, because I had a business. I started a business just down the road from where Repco had their main factory here in Richmond.
When you went out on your own, effectively, the first time?
First time I was on my own, I'd switched from being a state service manager for Suzuki Australia. I don't know whether, Mike, you know that or not?
No, I never knew that.
But I was service manager for Suzuki Australia for a while, for about 12, 18 months, and then decided I'd go back into, no matter what I did, I always had this passion for Italian motorcycles. So again, as good as the Japanese motorcycles are, the passion for Moto Guzzi was still there, so I came back working for myself, and that being very close to Repco just down the road, I got very friendly with one of the engineers that ran the engineering department, an Italian guy by the name of Ruggiero Giannini. So me working on Italian motorcycles and him being a full-blown Italian, we got on quite well, and used to quite often wander down at lunchtimes to see what I was doing, and that's certainly a lot of help came when I was doing Moto Guzzis, particularly some of my race stuff that I got involved with doing then.
When you got involved in competition and racing with Moto Guzzis, was that for a team or for individuals, or?
No, it was run by myself. I had some backing from Peter Stevens, and also the importer of Moto Guzzi in that time was a guy by the name of Terry Valmorbida, and he, along with probably prior to actually working for myself, I did actually work for Boldor, which is the Terry Valmorbida connection, and he was the one that pushed for me to go to Italy. So I was actually, I believe I was the first person ever to be sent from Australia to Moto Guzzi in Italy, and I spent 2 weeks there in the mid-70s, a bit after I came back from overseas.
A bit like doing a service course or an engineering course on
yeah,
Moto Guzzi.
Service maintenance, so in other words, how to set up differentials, how to set up gearboxes, and so forth. Speaking very little Italian, it was a very interesting 2 weeks. So we got to learn all the important words, like the word for blonde and all that sort of stuff, and a few other words that we perhaps shouldn't mention on.
Were there many others at the course?
No, I was the only person. So 2 weeks of in Italy, every day walking across the road to the factory and working with the guys in the race team, effectively what was their race shop, really.
So it wasn't really a factory course as such. They just put it on really just for you because
Basically because
someone from Australia had shown an interest.
Because of Terry Morbid, he had a very good connection with the managing director in Italy, Emilini. And this is back in the times of when Guzzi was owned by Di Tommaso, or towards the very end of it anyhow, and things weren't all that good from anybody that knows history of Di Tommaso and the Italian companies owned. He's certainly bought companies. Any money they made went to his, pretty much I think, his own purposes and needs, and the factories were
That's what entrepreneurs do, you know.
Well, I'm led to believe now that maybe that's where I went wrong. I should have been an entrepreneur instead of a guy who does Guzzis.
So when you came back to Australia, you put that knowledge to good use, both as a mechanic servicing bikes and also for racing.
For racing, and obviously stepping back slightly to Italy, obviously the guy that I had got on very well with, for whatever reason, was Giulio Agostini. And I mean, everybody that has Guzzis know about Agostini, but the business is still Agostini, but no longer owned by the family, and Giulio's since well and truly passed on. But I got on very well with him, and he was showing me some of the stuff he was doing, including the double overhead cam 4-valve cylinder heads that he was doing, which anybody's been to his shop will see the big, huge V-twin engine there with the belt-driven overhead cams, which they built for sidecar purposes. And he gave me a lot of information and passed on a lot of stuff to me that I believe that probably very few people got out of him. For some reason we clicked, and he felt that I probably wasn't just your average motorcycle drop kick, as a lot of people like to refer to us. And yeah, he passed on a lot of information of what they were doing and where the stuff was being made in Italy. And so yeah, very helpful. But I brought that back to Australia as well.
So what was your next step in Australia?
Well, after racing then, Guzzi, obviously, like particularly the Italian manufacturers, seem to go in cycles. So I was with Guzzi for about 10 years, and then it slowly waned. Sales were dropping off and business wasn't all that good. So I closed up my business and finished up working for an Alfa Romeo dealer for a couple of years, which we worked on Alfa and Ferrari. And the guy I worked for, he bought the ex-Alfa Romeo Australia's racing GTV, so I hence took over responsibility for total preparation of that. So I was quite happy to do that. So for that, everything, gearboxes, diffs, engine rebuilds, a lot. Did that for a couple of years, and then from there decided that maybe just being a mechanic wasn't quite what I wanted to do. I certainly missed out on engineering, but didn't really know what I wanted to do again. And then I joined Honda Australia as a technical trainer, and I actually spent some 25 years as a technical trainer, flying backwards and forwards to Japan and around the world. Again, luckily, you're dealing with engineers too a lot. So although I was a trainer in the dealership for the dealership technicians.
Well, that's quite interesting. I'll also get you to just talk about what you're up to now, because I believe you've retired from Honda.
Yes, 2 years ago I've retired from Honda, and I guess the wording is, I use the word semi-retire. Somehow or other I seem to be less of semi and not so much retire. I'm still now with my passion, so having retired I've moved to the country, about 200 kilometres out of Melbourne, and built a nice big garage that has all my machine shop equipment there. So I have my milling machines, lathes, flow benches, and we're back doing this sort of thing full time, but part time. I am retired, so I don't want to do too much work.
Plenty of time for travelling to the wineries.
That's it. I need time to go back to Italy and visit the home countries, I call it, and because where I live is wineries literally right out my front door, so to speak. I can walk literally probably 400 yards and I'm in my first winery. If I want to walk a quarter of a mile, I'm on my second winery, and so on. So it's a good area. They're all Italians, and I go to my local hotel. Everybody just knows me nowadays as a Mr. Guzzi. So I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Yeah, who knows? I suppose there are worse things to be called. But
so now all the patterns I've had for those years, like sump extensions, intake manifolds, some of the push rod conversions I used to do, I've dragged all this sort of stuff out and started to reproduce some of the bits and pieces, and quite surprised that some of the sump extensions on the big blocks. I've been selling quite a few of those. You don't sell 50,000 a year.
No, well, there's not as many big blocks. I suppose there's enough left, but it's not like during the era when they were new.
No, when they were new, the business was very brisk. Everybody wanted 40mm carbs and big manifolds, sump extensions, different cams, timing gears in them. Nowadays, there's not many of the bikes around that are running to that extent, and probably the ones that are probably have got some other bits and pieces in them, if not somebody else's. But there is still a market for it, particularly some of the older engines. If we go back to the 700s, the models without oil filter inside the engine, just the screeners. I've been requested recently to try and produce stuff, and we're able to make a kit to fit the early engines.
So you're looking at also producing an oil filter kit for some of the earlier engines?
It's a consideration at the moment. We've just done a conversion for the early engines where we can run a sump extension and you have to modify the oil pickup so it's down in the oil. Whether we actually produce a kit that actually puts an external oil filter in, I'm not sure. It's one of those things, it's running around up here, but just depends how motivated I get. And
how important is fitting an oil filter to those engines, do you think?
I don't think it's as important as a lot of people may think it is. If you keep good quality oil in it, change the oil as they suggest it should be done, I think most of the normal sludge that will normally come out will come out. The issue that I think is that people want to run too heavy oils, not detergent enough, not change it enough. The engines don't get run enough, so obviously Guzzi, you've got the lovely big sludge trap in the middle of the crank, so because the oil never gets hot, it fills up with sludge, and that's where the problem starts. If you run, even though they're old engines, run relatively modern thinking oil, so semi-synthetics.
Well, I think we've pretty much covered everything. Just want to thank you for your time, Bill.
That's all right, Mike. Great to talk to you, and hope everybody gets something out of it.